So, as a photographer, I'm constantly being asked, how do I feel about portrait mode? Or I'm constantly hearing comments like, portrait mode is gonna ruin photographers' jobs, photographers aren't gonna be able to get work because of portrait mode. And so I kind of just want to give my thoughts on how good portrait mode actually is. Hey guys, welcome to another video. My name is Monestime. I'm a portrait photographer based out of both Orlando, Florida and New York City. And welcome to another video. So portrait mode. For those that don't know what portrait mode is, it is essentially a smartphone's version of trying to emulate a DSLR camera. My main camera setup is a Nikon D850 with a 105mm 1.4 lens. And I'm just going to be completely honest, I'm not even biased or anything, but there isn't a single smartphone on this planet that's going to beat this setup here. This still doesn't change the fact that, smartphone cameras are amazing, but how good is it? Today we're going to talk about that. Recently I took a trip to Costa Rica, and on this trip I only bought my vlogging camera, which I'm using right now, my Sony a6300 and my iPhone XS. So while I was over there, I quickly realized that, it's going to be a lot of rain and stuff like that. So I kind of did not want to damage my vlogging camera. So essentially all the photos I took was on this phone. And the majority of the people that, wanted to actually be in photos, they were like, okay, I want the blurred background. So can we do portrait mode? Can we do this and that? Can we do that and this? And I was a little bit hesitant because as a photographer, I wasn't really that much of a fan of portrait mode just because it wasn't all the best. And but I finally decided to give it a chance, and I was actually quite surprised with how great the results were. Granted, it's not going to be as good as a DSLR camera, but it's still pretty good results. Another thing that kind of makes these phones a little bit more convenient is because this isn't really small. Look at the size comparison between these two. It's quite a huge size difference and weight difference itself. So, also, I don't really ever leave anywhere without my phone. So, we go to Costa Rica, we're going to all these places and stuff like that. I wouldn't want to have that gigantic camera with me. So that's kind of where the iPhone shined. And, although I was kind of reluctant to use portrait mode, I'm actually very happy that I did. Don't get me wrong, portrait mode is not perfect. I will zoom into one of these pictures and show you, towards the edges, that's where it kind of loses, its mojo, trying to guess where the edges are. The edges are never really clean. But, it's not really something that somebody would actually notice. I would notice it because I have a trained eye, but, the average person wouldn't actually notice. And let's be real, when you have that subject isolation, it's pretty nice. So portrait mode is actually a pretty good feature. But, it's not perfect, and it probably won't be perfect for at least a year or two. So yes, so the photographer in me was actually very reluctant to use portrait mode, but I'm actually glad that I did give it a chance because, now I know that, portrait mode is actually, a really neat feature, and especially with the ability to be able to adjust the amount of blur, which at 1.4 it becomes a little unrealistic, but other than that, it's actually a really nice feature. Portrait mode is actually pretty cool. Will it ever replace a DSLR camera? Absolutely not, because the way blurs are done, it's completely different. For instance, when an iPhone takes a photo using portrait mode, it kind of just tries to guess where the edges are and kind of just blur everything else. And it does try its best to give different amounts of blurs for the amount of distance that the photo has, but it's kind of different as opposed to a DSLR. When you are focusing, it's kind of the blur is basically on a focal plane as opposed to let's say if I'm over here and two people are in the exact same line as me and it's shot at 1.4 from 10 feet away, everybody in this same line will be in focus, and everything in front and behind, even though I did that completely backwards, will not be in focus. So that's where the difference shines. So the blur is always going to be different, and the blur is going to obviously be more accurate with a DSLR camera, but portrait mode is still not that far behind. As soon as they refine the edges and get all that, basically get all the clunks out, then I do believe that portrait mode will be a valid option, but it will never replace a DSLR or mirrorless camera. So even if you don't have your camera with you, you can still get some pretty good shots, like if you're on a trip or something like that. Because, I mean, let's be real, this is kind of like huge to be, bringing around everywhere, just, I mean, this is a smaller setup. I have a bigger setup here with my D810 and 70-200, which is, these are typically my two portrait setups. This is my main setup and this is my backup setup. And I mean, obviously, look at the size of these compared to a smartphone. So, that's kind of where the smartphone wins. Obviously, you're not going to ever, compete with a DSLR just because, I mean, we're talking about a full frame sensor versus like a smaller than micro four thirds sensor on a smartphone. So obviously DSLRs are going to be better at capturing light. The blur is always going to be better. You're going to get more detail, things such as that, things in that nature, excuse me. But smartphones are still, amazing, especially with these portrait modes. They're just great. Here's my final verdict on portrait mode, whether it be on the iPhone or the Samsungs or the Google Pixels. I do believe that, these portrait modes are an amazing tool because you are getting DSLR-like results on a smartphone. And I think that's a really powerful thing, especially a lot of people don't really want to spend, hundreds of dollars on a camera, but they want to get like nice pictures. And obviously to the untrained eye, these pictures are going to look similar to a DSLR. So my eyes are trained, so I'm obviously going to be able to tell, I just look at the corners, or not the corners, excuse me, just look at the edges, and then you'll basically see, okay, this was taken with portrait mode. But it's still like a huge leap forward for smartphones, and I do believe that, it's going to get better and better and better and better. DSLR cameras are great, but it's just like, I mean, look at how small this is. If I'm, backpacking around Europe and stuff like that, I wouldn't really want to bring, this gigantic camera with me. Obviously, the photographer in me wouldn't let me not bring this, but I mean, just look at the size to comparison, it's just so much smaller. And, you also don't have to worry about interchangeable lenses and stuff like that. So smartphone cameras are pretty good, and portrait mode is, is getting better, especially year by year. It is getting significantly better. So I do believe like within the next, few years or so, portrait mode will be comparable to DSLRs, but obviously DSLRs will always have that extra edge. So with that being said, would I ever do a professional photo shoot using only portrait mode? Absolutely not. But it's possible. Obviously I'd want to use the best gear that I have. That's why I paid for it. But it is actually possible to, do photo shoots with just an iPhone. We see videos all the time. A photographer does a pro photo shoot with an iPhone, and, the results are great. Portrait mode is definitely a huge step forward. And, I'm actually going to be less hesitant to use portrait mode in like a actual scenario. I'd be less hesitant to use it because I am seeing that, portrait mode is a lot better than it used to be. Because before, back in the iPhone 7, back in the iPhone 7 areas when portrait mode was like a thing, it would be so grainy that it'd be unusable and stuff like that. But, the photos are a lot more cleaner. The edges are getting better. They're not perfect, but they are getting better. And obviously being able to adjust the amount of background blur that you have is also a huge bonus that, is, which is making a lot of people start to, actually use portrait mode more. It's becoming more and more, usable, and which is great. So, portrait mode is definitely, it's on its way. And, obviously I'm going to still use my DSLR cameras. I'm not going to just I'm not saying throw your cameras away and use portrait mode. But for those people that, do not have a DSLR camera or a mirrorless camera, it's still possible to get, pictures with nice background blur. Obviously the blur is artificial, but it is possible to get those pictures that have nice background blur with just an iPhone or just a Samsung or just a Google Pixel, and basically any other phone that does it. There go my thoughts on, how good I think portrait mode is. If you guys agree with me, go ahead and leave a comment. If you disagree with me, go ahead and leave a comment. If you guys did like this video, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe to my channel. If you guys have it, my name is Monestime, and I'm out.